Bon matin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fundamental series. Today, we're talking about internal controls, a very interesting topic. Donc, la séance d'aujourd'hui sur la série des principes fondamentaux de la gestion financière vient toucher les contrôles internes. Merci aussi de vous joindre à nous. Mon nom est Jocelyne Charon et je suis la directrice exécutive de la gestion des collectivités de la fonction de contrôleur et aussi de la surveillance. Et je me joins à vous du bureau du contrôleur général. Nous allons avoir des panélistes aujourd'hui avec nous, ainsi qu'un expert sur les contrôles internes. Donc, nous espérons que cette session soit intéressante pour vous. Je tiens également à préciser que je me joins à vous aujourd'hui depuis Ottawa. Donc, peut-être que vous nous joignez aussi d'autres territoires tout au sein du Canada. Et alors, je me trouve sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé de Nation Anishinaabe-Algonquin. Le 30 septembre, qui s'en vient tout prochainement, est une journée pour réfléchir à la vérité, à l'histoire et aussi aux séquelles des pensionnats autochtones. Mais alors, je vous invite à chacun d'entre vous à envisager comment vous allez souligner cette journée et contribuer aussi à la réconciliation. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais vous rappeler que cette séance est bilingue. I will be switching to English throughout the session as well. Et aussi à vous inviter à poser des questions et à interagir dans la langue de votre choix. Un service d'interprétation simultanée est offert pour l'événement. Pour y avoir accès, veuillez utiliser la fonction d'interprétation de votre plateforme de réunion virtuelle et sélectionner la langue de votre choix. Nous allons aussi utiliser la fonctionnalité WooClap pour poser des questions et vous aurez l'opportunité d'interagir avec nous, avec nos panélistes et aussi avec notre présentateur principal. Donc, je vous invite de prendre votre téléphone mobile ou aussi d'y accéder via le web en saisissant le www.wooclap.com et aussi saisir le code, et vous le voyez ici à l'écran, FMES26 pour participer. Donc, c'est un signal pour vous d'être prêt. Puis, si vous avez des questions durant la présentation, vous pourrez nous les poser et nous tenterons d'y répondre. Veuillez aussi noter que la présentation est disponible dans les 2 langues officielles dans la section ressources de la page de l'événement, ainsi qu'une liste utile d'autres ressources. Donc, si vous êtes curieux, vous pouvez vous y joindre pour les consulter. Notre programme est assez chargé. Donc, après chaque partie, nous aurons l'occasion de discuter avec des panélistes. Et s'il y a le temps aussi, les panélistes pourront prendre vos questions et d'où la fonction WooClap pour vous appuyer. Et aussi, vous pouvez utiliser la fonction clavardage de la plateforme Web Diffusion en cliquant sur l'icône de bulle en haut de votre écran. Donc, nous avons, pour cadrer un peu la discussion, Martin Crummins, qui est en fait mon patron. Martin est le contrôleur général adjoint, donc relève directement de la contrôleur générale Annie Boudreau. Et il relève, dans le fond, il prend soin de la fonction financière pour la fonction publique dans son ensemble. Donc, c'est un rôle important qui cadre notre gestion financière. Et il est ici un peu pour vous inspirer sur la raison et l'importance du segment qu'on va partager avec nous. Donc, à toi, Martin. Merci d'être ici avec nous ce matin aussi.
Excellent. Thank you, Jocelyn. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today for the Financial Management Essentials series. This series highlights the core elements of financial management, with each session focusing on a unique theme, topic, and set of presenters. Today's topic of strengthening internal controls is particularly special for me because it's where I started my leadership path. But before I get into that, I do want to thank the Canada School for organizing this event and creating a space where we can come together, learn from one another, and strengthen our community. Continuous learning is at the heart of our growth as financial professionals. In a field that is constantly evolving, staying current with the latest knowledge and skills is essential, not just for our own development, but for the strength of the places we work. Opportunities like this allow us to deepen our understanding, sharpen our expertise, and build the foundation for long-term success. I encourage all of you to take full advantage of it, ask questions, share your perspectives, and view this as a meaningful investment in your career. So, a little bit about me. I didn't begin as an executive like you. I started as an FI. I did all aspects of financial management, planning, budgeting, accounting, and financial oversight. Step by step, I built my career in departments both large and small, from fisheries and oceans to Treasury Board Secretariat, where some say I helped shape government wide financial decisions, and ultimately at Public Health Agency of Canada, where I feel very proud that I was fortunate enough to lead a team of financial management experts during a global pandemic. So, looking back, one lesson that stayed with me through every role and every challenge: financial management is about trust. Trust in our systems, that they are designed to protect public resources, trust in our teams we lead, that together we can solve problems and find solutions, and trust in ourselves to make the right decisions even when the path is not clear. I know that our work is often behind the scenes, sometimes seen as an enabling function. When we do it well, no one notices it. But when you know what the value of what we do, it really goes to your heart. With sound financial management, nothing else functions as it should. That's why today's theme, strengthening internal controls, is so important. Internal controls are not just checklists and approval process, they are safeguards that give Canadians confidence in their government. They are structures that allow managers and executives to take bold action, knowing the risks, yes, multiple risks, that those risks are being managed responsibly. So controls are also quite quiet but critical backbone of public trust. When controls are strong, people don't have to think twice about whether their money is being used as intended. But when they are weak, trust erodes, and once it's lost, it's very hard to regain. So, do we think it's so important that we need to talk about it? Of course we do. The team here at the OCG has worked very hard to set up financial management competency compass, which I hope will help us as financial professionals navigate our careers and develop skills. But just as important, it also informed the design of this learning series, connecting our professional development directly to the competencies that matter the most. So, how do internal controls fit here? They tie directly to at least three of those competencies: strategic thinking, oversight and risk management, and compliance. They provide leaders with reliable information for forward looking decisions, mechanisms to monitor resources and manage those risks that I spoke about earlier, and processes that embed compliance naturally into our daily work. In this way, internal controls not only protect public resources, but also enable us to pursue our missions with confidence, accountability, and integrity. So, we're very honored to have with us today Ralph Jabbour, Director of Financial Management Policy at Treasury Board Secretariat, who will walk us through the system of internal controls, the Government of Canada context, and their evolution, as well as David Valancourt, Director of Internal Controls Division at CRA, and Isabelle Massé, Manager of Internal Controls at Indigenous Services Canada. They will participate in panel discussions at the end of each segment, sharing insights from their years of experience and addressing questions from participants. So, thank you again to the Canada School for bringing us together for this important discussion. I look forward to the conversations ahead and to continuing to build that strong, trusted financial community, one that Canadians can count on. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Ralph to get us started. A reminder, the slides in both official languages are available in the resource section. Thank you.
Merci Martin. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être ici pour cette séance essentielle sur les contrôles internes. Euh, dans un contexte gouvernemental plus en plus complexe, comme Martin a déjà dit, les contrôles internes sont indispensables pour assurer la transparence, la responsabilisation et une saine gestion des ressources publiques. Aujourd'hui, nous allons voir comment le contrôle s'intègre dans notre travail quotidien et comment chacun d'entre nous peut y contribuer. Nous commencerons par le base, ce que sont les contrôles internes et pourquoi ils sont importants. Mais comprendre les bases n'est pas seulement théorique, c'est de voir comment ces contrôles préviennent des problèmes. Ensuite, nous examinerons comment les contrôles internes sont appliqués aujourd'hui dans le secteur public fédéral. Et enfin, nous explorons comment les contrôles internes évoluent avec les nouvelles technologies et les nouveaux risques. Euh, Avec les technologies émergentes comme AI, ces contrôles doivent s'adapter pour gérer des nouveaux risques. Mais avant de commencer, la première section, nous allons, comme Jocelyn a déjà dit, utilisons WooClap pour échanger avec vous un peu et pour comprendre votre niveau de familiarité avec le contrôle interne. Je pense que tous les participants, on a le code de WooClap. Oui, c'est F1. Oui, ok, c'est ça. Euh, et vos réponses nous aideront un peu à adapter le contenu à vos réalités. Alors, les trois questions sont... c'est un peu difficile de voir. OK. Dans quelle mesure connaissez-vous les contrôles internes du gouvernement du Canada? Ah, un peu d'expérience avec ça. Et quel type de... ah, j'ai vu un mélange de niveaux d'expérience. Mm.
Bon, je pense que Ralph, on t'a peut-être perdu. Est-ce que tu es encore avec nous?
Mhm.
Euh,
Oui, oui, je sais. Oui, oui.
OK, tu es
C'est,
ici, c'est
c'est un
bon.
peu difficile
De lire, oui, exactement.
de lire de l'écran, oui,
Je suis
oui, oui.
d'accord
Mais
avec vous.
les trois questions sont là, oui.
Oui,
Le type
absolument. Puis on voit un
d'organisation,
peu
grand, petit,
le
oui,
niveau
oui,
différent un peu de la
oui,
connaissance des gens là,
oui,
sur les
oui,
contrôles internes, qui est quand même un fait important. Ça veut dire qu'ils vont peut-être bénéficier de la discussion ce matin.
oui. Et on a un mélange de participants de grands ministères, petits ministères,
Oui,
euh,
exactement.
et les différentes communautés. Alors, je pense que euh,
Oui, donc on demande ici quels sont les gens de la collectivité de la gestion financière. Donc, c'est la majorité de vous, 80, environ 80. On a d'autres aussi. Donc, on aimerait savoir c'est qui ces gens-là. Le dit aussi, donc intéressant parce qu'il y a définitivement une complémentarité entre les contrôles internes et aussi le rôle de la vérification interne. Définitivement, ces choses-là sont différentes, ont des sphères d'interaction différentes, mais définitivement aussi complémentaires. Donc, merci. On sait un petit peu qui vous êtes ce matin. Donc, à toi, Ralph, pour continuer le dialogue.
okay. Okay, so in our first section, we're going to talk about the system of internal controls. And I think as we heard Martin earlier in his opening remarks, he talked about uh, financial management uh, is ultimately about trust. And I think this is why this today's session is important because I think internal controls are really how we earn and protect that trust. So think of them, I guess, as seat belts or an airbag or a GPS in a car, right? We don't notice them most of the time, but when something goes wrong, they make all the difference. So we wouldn't manage billions of taxpayers' dollars without these invisible safety systems. Of course, we wouldn't, right? So imagine driving without a GPS. Well, I know I would be lost. Maybe most of us would be lost. So similarly, without these controls, we'd risk misallocating funds, right? So these invisible tools I think Martin mentioned they're kind of invisible. They're behind the scenes. They're essential for managing billions of taxpayers' dollars. So this is why we think this session is important. And then we tried to bring subject matter expertise from different departments. And I think also between Justin and I, we have a bit of experience in the area. So we're hoping that it's not going to be all theory, and we're going to try and make this a little bit entertaining, exciting. So from an Office of the Controller General perspective, uh, there we internal controls aren't just compliance, right? They're strategic tools. They 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 help departments to operate efficiently, produce reliable information, stay aligned with laws, regulations, policies, and most importantly,
they cut across every function. So for the people in the audience that are not in finance, this isn't just about finance, but it's about procurement, it's about IT, it's about HR, and it's about programs. So everyone has a role to play. So what are some examples of this? So for example, a manager checking budget variances. What if the manager skips this step? So it could lead to unexpected shortfalls. So controls prevent that from happening. A procurement officer, for example, verifying vendor credentials before awarding a contract. What if we forget this verification? So this is a big risk of non-compliance. Controls protect against that. Even in a program environment, a program analyst reallocating funds, for example, based on reliable spending data. What if this data is not accurate? So this could lead to wrong decisions. So controls ensure reliability. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about theory. Where I promise I'm not going to go into too much into theory, but there are some critical things or important things that we need to cover. For example, at the heart of this system is what is referred to the five key elements of internal controls. These are defined by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treasury Commission, also known as COSO. These elements, they work together to help the organization achieve its objectives related not only to just operations, but reporting and compliance. So what are these five elements? Uh, Leadership, to start with, sets the expectations of ethical behavior and accountability under the control environment. For example, this is having a clear policy on ethics guides daily decisions. Uh, Identifying and evaluating risks that could impact these objectives is done through risk assessments. This is like, for example, evaluating cybersecurity risks in an IT project. Uh, Checks, approvals, reconciliations, these are the guardrails referred to as control activities. That's what the control activity element's about. So for example, think of approving a travel claim or any expense. That's a control that ensures the appropriate use of funds. And then ensuring the timely, accurate, and transparent reporting is part of information and communication. And this could include monthly reports to increase transparency. And then finally, one of the key elements, in my opinion, is the ongoing review and adoption of these controls. So as risks evolve or there are more risks, we need to continuously monitor that these controls are working. In addition to these kind of five elements, there are two other elements that influence the control environment. This is the tone from the top, which sets the expectations for integrity and transparency, and this is referred to as the management's philosophy and operating style. And of course, human resources, which promotes staff competence and ethical standards. So these aren't just kind of add-ons or supplementary. They're foundational to the entire system. So for example, or for instance, the tone from the top models ethical behavior from leadership, so creating a culture of integrity, while the HR function ensures staff are competent and aligned with ethical standards through ongoing training, ultimately building long-term trust across the organization. And this is kind of why the competency compass is so important for us for the FM community. So next slide, please. Uh, so why do these controls matter? Uh, they support financial integrity, as I mentioned, by protecting assets from loss, from misuse, from fraud. They ensure that the data is accurate for reporting and transparency, and they strengthen accountability and compliance across all levels of the organization. So uh, this is done. This happens because they support compliance to policies and procedures, and they allow us to apply the rules and procedures consistently. Uh, they provide peace of mind by reducing risks, as we mentioned already, and they enable us to uh, to make better decisions. So when everyone plays their part, the system works, but it requires everyone's participation to function effectively. So internal controls allow the organization to pivot in order to address unforeseen pressures confidently without sacrificing other objectives. So I know we had a mix of participants, so I want to try and kind of incorporate a kind of a what's in it for me. If you're a procurement person or a finance person or an audit person, and for a finance person, this means fewer last minute surprises, right? So the data's clean. It helps the CFO in doing their attestations. For a procurement practitioner, this means stronger defensible files, so fewer challenges. If some of the participants are an internal audit, this means uh, less, I guess, in a way, firefighting, but more time looking at strategic risks. And then if you're a program person, it means faster, smoother funding with fewer delays. So the way we're going to do this, and I think this is going to repeat every segment, at the end of hopefully not my boring presentation, we're going to do some true and false questions, and then we'll get into probably the most exciting part, which is the panel discussion. So what we'll do now is through Woo Clap, I think we have a couple of true and false questions. And again, these aren't, please don't be discouraged. These aren't skill testing questions. We just wanted to kind of get a sense of people's knowledge. So our first question is internal
The first
controls.
question is,
Yeah.
yes, we want to know if internal controls are only relevant for auditors. I say true, and I would fail. Hopefully
So
not.
what do we have here? We have a mix of
Yeah. A mix of
take out 54, 40,
responses. Yeah.
false. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, we're not, this isn't a test. It's the answer is actually false because they're really not just relevant to auditors, they're relevant to all management, right? And they're the responsibility of all of us and the entire organization. So uh, they're just not they help the entire organization as I already said. So if you got it right or if you got it wrong, there is no right or wrong answer. It really the what we were trying to get at here is that they're important to the whole organization, whether you're an auditor, in a program, in procurement, in IT. Yeah. Oh, the
Okay.
results are
And
still
then our
coming in. Our
second
next
question
second
is
question.
about the deputy head, an important person in your
Yep.
organizations. We're
Mhm.
asking if they're ultimately responsible for establishing and maintaining the system of internal control for their department. So is that true or false? And again, we talked about the internal controls being a bit of a safety, your seatbelt or your GPS, right? So
That's right.
deputy heads, I don't know how many policies they have to oversee across their organizations and compliance. They are the accounting officer. If something goes wrong, they are accountable to Parliament. So, how do we make sure that they can sleep at night? How do we make sure that they know that things are going in conformity with the policies, that their funds are being properly spent, that they're getting the value to Canadians? And then a bit of that safety net that Ralph spoke about. Many people got that one right, Ralph. Good job.
Many
That means
people
they
got it right.
understand. Yeah,
Good job.
good job.
It's maybe it's an unfair question because I think I'm talking about the policy in the next segment, but it is a requirement in the policy on financial management, but you'll hear me talk about that a little later. So I think with this, Jesslyn, we
Yes.
move to our panel
We're
discussion.
going to have some of our panelists come and join us. So these are two specialists. They breathe and live internal control in their respective departments. So Martin introduced David and Isabelle to you a little bit earlier. So I'm going to ask them a few questions so you can apply a bit of what Ralph was saying in terms of that theory, the concepts, and then see how they are in action in your departments. And to me, honestly, because there's so many requirements, so many processes, so many accountabilities in the system, how do we make sure that there's consistency across the 105 federal departments and agencies? How do we make sure that we have the trust to parliamentarians. And so your system of internal control is actually one of those unique functions, other than potentially your auditors, right? That would come in after the fact when something is broken, or do an audit and then have those fact findings on the audit. So this is more of a preventative measure as discovery, but it kind of, to me, it's a bit of a report card, an early report card of where things are going well and where things need to be improved. So I'm going to ask Isabelle. Merci d'être avec nous ici, Isabelle. So
Thank you very much for being with us, Isabelle.
shift in the way process owners view internal control and value the work of your team.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So yes, we did see a shift in the mindset. So for us in internal control, we do assessments of internal control, but ultimately the responsibility is of everyone in the organization. And then especially for financial controls, at first it was more of a compliance exercise, and I did see a shift in how it can be more of a process improvement and how we can bring efficiency to the process. So there's more collaboration with business process owners. They're more involved in designing and monitoring the controls. And we also see a shift in shared accountability. They understand how they can improve their process, and if they see that there is a risk of a control having a gap, they will discuss with us and ensure that the controls are in place, and to ensure also that they are sufficient controls. So for the shift, there's added value. They see us as a partner for the internal control team. So they will ask us for question and our recommendation. If they are reviewing a process, they'll ask us to review those processes and to ensure that they have the controls in place. So it's really about communication with the teams, with the process owners, so there's more collaboration. So that's part of the big shift that I've seen in internal controls.
I agree with you. And that's why, like, you can, over control things. So that's where a bit of that risk and that strategic thinking ultimately, where do you focus effort in relation to risk, in relation to impact? And as well, I feel our context in which we operate is so different, right? Not the same as 10 years ago. So if you have potentially the same key controls that you did 10 years ago, I think we're doing business very differently. Our vulnerabilities are different, maybe vulnerabilities to fraud, to kind of malfeasance. So I think there's a lot of proactiveness, which beats a bit that we spoke to you about the compass on the strategic thinking and risk management. So very much of a dynamic context and not static. David, so you're at CRA, Director of Internal Controls for a huge organization. So how do you embed a culture of accountability and control across the level at CRA? I'm sure that that's not easy feat.
No, it's not silly easy, but it's something that we need to work on every day. So at CRA, it is well established that internal control are part of good management and service delivery. So not just compliance. And accountability is really at the heart of it. So based on my internal control assessment experience, to embed a culture of accountability and control, it starts from the tone from the top. Every year at CRA, at our management audit committee, we present our internal control assessment scope. We discuss the importance of control. We reinforce role and responsibility of all senior leaders regarding maintaining a good system of internal control over financial reporting and financial management, because everyone is helping with that. And that message flow down through the official CFO launch letter, to formal launch email, to meetings, conversation at every level, with support from all senior leaders. Then, when we do our work, we do our assessment work, we insert strong documentation. And sometimes people say the documentation is boring, but you will understand my point. Documentation brings clarity. So this includes what control is being done, why it is done, how and when it is performed, who is the control performer, and who is accountable for each of those controls. So by documenting that, it's clarify role and responsibility and accountability at the same time. People understand why it's important every control they do. And finally, when we report result, it's not just a technical report. We validate finding with the people who do the work, so the control performer. share them with the manager, executive, which are the accountable for the control. And all of this is documented into letter of recommendation with DG approved action plan. We also send result summary at DG and branch level to ensure accountability of the full chain of command. And then we go back to our management audit committee to present these results to close the loop on the planning presented earlier to that committee. And finally, and this is very important also because we tie the loop with the because our result at the end of the day is incorporated in the statement of management responsibility and its annex, which is an integrated part of the financial statement. And that financial statement is approved by the CRA Board of Management and co-signed by the CFO and Commissioner. So there's like a trace of making sure that they understand their responsibility, and then this is where the results are published to everyone. So the culture of accountability and control is embedded in all levels across the organization by, I would say, the tone from the top, strong documentation, and solid governance structure.
I like it. I do agree. It has to come from the top, and to me, it's about making sure that the deputy head and the senior ADMs and ADMs in your organization understand that they are a little bit delivering programs, and these programs have key controls, right? But unless we document them, we check them, we validate them, your safety nets are kind of not really known or understood. So it's kind of working about making sure they're aware of it. And that's a bit something that maybe we don't do. It's not embedded necessarily in all the programs because it's a bit more, I guess, of a financial thing that we're built in as if you're a CPA or accountant in terms of integrity and transparency. But thank you for that, David. Isabelle, rapidement, quickly for you, how does weak internal controls increase risk, and what can we do to strengthen it?
Weak internal controls can lead to financial errors. If we focus on financial internal controls, there's risk of frauds and misuse of public funds. There's also a risk of non-compliance with policies and reputational damage. For example, there can be some scrutiny in the media or findings in internal audit. To strengthen internal controls, as David said, and also Ralph, roles and responsibilities need to be clearly documented and clarified, who does what and when. Documentation, as David mentioned also, processes need to be documented, any decision. This way, processes can be standardized and also consistent. And there's also data analytics that can be used to strengthen internal controls. We can do real-time reviews and invest in training and awareness. Internal controls are the responsibilities of everyone in an organization. So it's important that if an employee is completing a checklist, that they understand that they're reviewing that checklist to ensure that there's no errors or no gap in the specific process. So this shows how weak internal controls, especially roles and responsibility and documentation, are important, and that it's the responsibilities of everyone in the organization.
I agree with that. Thank you very much. And we'll talk about it in a little bit about how new innovative technologies could actually transform a little bit, making internal control maybe a little bit more effective, give you more coverage as well. Because as you said, Isabelle, the risks are quite high, right? Risk of loss of public trust, potentially loss of, scrutiny of how taxpayers' money is spent. So those are real challenges and as well realities, as we are public servants. So I think that those are important, but lots of availability to strengthen as well, which is why we're here today. So I'll turn it over to Ralph. We have another little bit more of a theoretical segment. Just a reminder for all of you that the slides are available in both official languages in the resource section. Though, Ralph, over to you.
Merci Jocelyn. Alors, dans cette section, nous voyons le cadre des contrôles internes au gouvernement du Canada. Et ce cadre est basé sur la politique sur la gestion financière. Pourquoi c'est important? Parce que ces contrôles assurent la transparence, la responsabilisation et une bonne gestion des fonds publics, même dans un environnement complexe. Euh, c'est, ok. Regardons ensemble les points essentiels dans cette diapositive. La politique sur la gestion financière définit l'exigence pour un système de contrôle interne basé sur le risque, comme nous déjà dit. Voici les rôles principaux. L'administrateur général établit, surveille et maintient ce système pour réduire le risque financier. Euh, Par exemple, en s'assurant que les fonds de subvention sont traçables, cela évite des pertes et renforce la confiance publique. Le rôle de dirigeant principal de finances est de mettre en place les contrôles et de rapport au comité de haute direction et consigne la déclaration de responsabilité de la direction pour assurer des rapports fiables. Le rôle des cadres supérieurs ou responsables de processus est d'appliquer les contrôles et avise le dirigeant principal de finances de lacunes et prennent euh, peut-être des mesures correctives. Par exemple, euh, en prévenant un dépassement budgétaire via des revues mensuelles. C'est le contrôle qui évite ça. Et c'est quoi le rôle de tous les employés? C'est de mettre en œuvre les contrôles opérationnels et de signaler peut-être les faiblesses dans le système. Par exemple, quand quelqu'un remarquait une erreur dans un facteur, euh, ce n'est pas, c'est prévenir peut-être un fraude potentielle. Alors, cette approche commune renforce la gestion responsable et la reddition de comptes à tous les niveaux. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Euh, C'est ok. C'est la conformité et surveillance. La surveillance assure que tous les contrôles fonctionnent bien euh, avec ces trois piliers. L'audit interne ministériel, je pense que Jocelyne a déjà mentionné ça. Par exemple, la fonction d'audit interne fait d'examens basés sur le risque et donne une assurance indépendante à la direction. Par exemple, la fonction identifier rapidement des faiblesses dans les achats pour économiser des ressources. Mais cela non seulement économiser des ressources, mais renforce la confiance publique par des corrections proactives. Le Bureau de vérificateur général du Canada effectuait des audits indépendants et conseille le Parlement, mais ces rapports annuels renforcent les contrôles solides et soulignent l'utilisation responsable des fonds publics. Et le processus de risque et de conformité, qui est basé sur le cadre de responsabilisation de gestion, évalue la gestion et se concentre sur des contrôles efficaces. Euh, le nouveau processus de risque et de conformité est euh, un système agile. Il priorise aussi les risques émergents comme par exemple la cybersécurité. Euh, alors, ces mécanismes ensemble soutiennent l'amélioration continue et renforcent la confiance du public. Prochaine, merci. OK. C'est quoi le rôle de professionnel des finances? Mais comme j'ai déjà dit, les contrôles internes sont la responsabilité de tout. Ce n'est pas seulement la responsabilité de professionnels de finances, mais les professionnels des finances montrent la voie et assurent le leadership. Même si vous n'êtes pas en finance, votre contribution aussi compte. Par exemple, identifier un problème dans un processus opérationnel. C'est une forme de contrôle aussi. C'est l'environnement de contrôle, mais de l'avant l'éthique et la transparence. Par exemple, donné par la haute direction, créer une culture d'intégrité. La gestion des risques, identifier et gère les risques dans la planification budgétaire et les prévisions. Euh, L'activité, spécifiquement l'activité de contrôle, vérifier et valide conformément à la loi ou les différentes politiques. Euh, et la surveillance se tient l'attestation de dirigeant principal des finances et ajuste les contrôles selon le changement numérique. Euh, un peu de conseil général aux pratiques pour les participants. Gardez je pense que David a parlé un peu de ça. La documentation est très importante. Alors, garder la documentation à jour est très important. Collaborer avec l'équipe de contrôle et proposer des plans d'action réalistes. Cela signifie euh, des, des- des données fiables pour les finances et moins de retard pour les programmes. Et c'est très important de mettre à jour la documentation, euh, pas comme un exercice routinier, mais pour documenter les changements dans le contrôle. Et je pense que cela évite les problèmes majeurs évite les problèmes majeurs. Avant, je pense qu'on a quelques questions de vrai ou faux aussi avant la deuxième discussion.
C'est ça,
Euh,
exactement. Donc, on va voir
ouais,
si les gens
ouais,
ont écouté ce que tu as dit,
ouais,
Ralph. Est-ce qu'ils ont bien compris? On vous demande d'aller sur le WooClap encore une fois. Et puis, la question, dans le fond, c'était un vrai ou faux. Les contrôles internes sont un exercice de conformité ponctuel réalisé en fin d'année. Vrai ou faux? Non, on a quand même une bonne partie des votes. On est près de, tantôt ils nous ont dit les chiffres, on était près de 2000 personnes inscrites. Donc, on va venir chercher, on va voir dans combien de vous êtes actifs sur le WooClap, là. Majoritairement, on va leur donner la bonne réponse, Ralph.
ouais,
Ils ont
ouais, c'est ça.
compris que c'est pas
Ouais,
juste statique en fin
ouais,
d'exercice. Ça serait pas une bonne idée, hein?
ouais, ouais,
Euh,
ouais.
on a une
C'est,
deuxième question.
bon. La deuxième
Oui, c'est
question.
la collectivité de la gestion financière joue un rôle essentiel dans le soutien apporté au directeur des finances et aux directeurs généraux adjoints pour maintenir les contrôles efficaces. Donc, dans le fond, c'est une responsabilité pour tout le monde, mais on a donné un peu le rôle de maintenir, donc, au dirigeant principal des finances, qui a souvent un rôle au niveau de l'entreprise, donc à l'échelle de votre ministère, et qui joue souvent un rôle horizontal. Et on leur a donné un peu cette responsabilité-là de maintenir le système de contrôle interne pour appuyer l'administrateur général. Comme Ralph a passé. Pour moi, je trouve ça assez intéressant parce que à la fonction publique, la majorité de nos processus, c'est des processus transformés avec des humains. Donc, tu sais, si on était dans une industrie machine, par exemple, on verrait que le contrôle de fabrication, je ne sais pas moi, d'un pot de peinture, ça se transforme par une machine à l'autre et donc le contrôle, c'est est-ce qu'on a fait le maintien de la machine, est-ce que la machine est brisée, est-ce huilée, mais parce que à la fonction publique, la majorité de notre transformation se fait un peu par le capital humain. C'est là où l'importance de documenter vos actions. Si vous faites une vérification, on doit s'assurer que ce fournisseur-là est légitime. Le compte de banque du fournisseur est légitime. Il ne faut pas qu'on mette l'argent dans le compte de banque de pas la bonne personne. Donc, ça, qui vérifie, puis comment on documente le contrôle. Donc, c'est là ça vient un peu lourd parce qu'on se dit, ben c'est du narratif, mais sinon, comment on documente la façon que les fonctionnaires fonctionnent pour transformer un programme et un service en valeur pour un Canadien. Donc, c'est un peu différent parce que c'est pas tangible autant, mais je trouve que c'est peut-être une belle façon de l'expliquer. Donc là, je vous ramène avec Isabelle puis David. On va leur poser des petites questions parce qu'évidemment, ce sont nos gens experts. Donc, David, en quoi le processus de risque et conformité a-t-il une incidence sur votre groupe et prévoyez-vous faire des changements?
Merci Jocelyne pour la question. Donc, premièrement, c'est un processus super important, là, le PRC. C'est avec ça qu'on évalue la performance, la conformité des agences, des ministères, de leurs sous-ministres, des commissaires. Ça, c'est super important comme processus et ça touche plein de domaines. Donc, si je parle de l'évolution du cadre de responsabilité de gestion, donc l'ancien MAF, le CRG, vers le processus de risque de conformité, le PRC, ça a été très intéressant. Nous avons été impliqués là, dès le départ. On a participé à la plupart des itérations, du projet pilote jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Et je vais être franc, au début, j'avais l'impression qu'il s'agissait surtout d'une mise à jour avec un nouveau nom, une nouvelle couche de peinture pour souligner son importance. Mais au fil des discussions, j'ai mieux compris le repositionnement, les objectifs désirés par le dans le PRC. Donc, avant de parler des exemples concrets pour mon groupe, je pense que c'est important de rappeler que le PRC a une portée beaucoup plus large que juste les contrôles internes financiers. Ça exige une collaboration avec plusieurs joueurs clés dans vos agences, dans vos ministères. J'ai d'ailleurs remarqué une collaboration accrue entre les équipes stratégiques et mon équipe de contrôle interne lors de l'élaboration des résultats. Donc, c'est une belle nouveauté. C'était déjà fait avant, mais c'est plus renforcé. Donc, je vais me concentrer un peu plus sur l'impact du PRC sous l'angle contrôle interne. Bon, comme toute nouvelle chose, la première année du PRC, on a eu besoin de certains ajustements pour établir les fondations. Dans plusieurs cas, on faisait déjà une bonne partie des activités demandées, mais il a fallu faire évoluer notre approche. Je le vois ici plus dans une évolution, pas nécessairement des changements, parce que c'est des choses qu'on faisait déjà. Par exemple, pour l'identification des risques, auparavant, on en faisait une, on faisait une analyse environnementale qui alimentait surtout notre planification de l'évaluation des contrôles internes. Maintenant, nous devons aussi présenter, partager ces risques sous un angle stratégique pour l'agence. Pour le suivi des observations, on a fait des améliorations, on a standardisé notre façon de mesurer l'avancement, ce qui a aidé à renforcer la reddition des comptes. Pour les définitions des niveaux de risque, il a fallu les raffiner un peu parce qu'on voulait s'assurer d'une cohérence avec les objectifs du PRC. Et finalement, l'évaluation des contrôles internes. Nous sommes passés, en fait, nous sommes en train de passer d'une logique de suffisance à une logique de maturité. Donc, ce que je veux dire par là, c'est que plutôt que se demander si un contrôle est suffisant, maintenant, nous travaillons désormais à aussi évaluer son niveau de maturité, ce qui favorise l'amélioration continue. Donc, évidemment, ces aspects continueront d'évoluer au fur et à mesure qu'on va acquérir de l'expérience. Puis, je crois aussi que le processus va être affiné dans le temps pour assurer davantage d'alignement entre les ministères, entre les agences dans la façon d'y répondre. Au final, le PRC nous amène à réfléchir différemment. Il ne s'agit plus seulement d'atteindre un niveau suffisant de contrôle, mais de démontrer une maturité, un avancement, de partager davantage nos résultats. Cela renforce la transparence, stimule l'amélioration continue, puis démontre surtout la valeur ajoutée de nos travaux de contrôle interne.
J'aime ça. Évidemment, je pense à cause qu'il y a de l'argent un peu dans tout ce qu'on fait, tous nos programmes et nos services, souvent, nous sommes des professionnels des finances, les seuls qui vont amener le dialogue horizontal et donc aussi amener la discussion des risques, la tolérance, les vulnérabilités à la table de gestion. Puis des fois, on est correct avec le risque, mais des fois, on va se dire non, il faut faire mieux. On n'est pas confortable avec ça, donc on va vouloir inciter des mesures correctives. Je suis d'accord avec toi. Donc, au niveau de la discussion, la gouvernance, je pense que ce sont tous des bienfaits positifs un peu de ce nouveau processus de risque et conformité. Isabelle, comment les professionnels de la gestion financière, on en a beaucoup ici aujourd'hui, peuvent-ils informer ou influencer les administrateurs généraux et les directeurs financiers en ce qui concerne l'efficacité des contrôles internes?
Donc, pour informer et influencer les hauts dirigeants, il faut parler leur langage. Donc, appuyer nos messages avec des données, relier les contrôles aux risques. Donc, si on veut les influencer puis on met un accent sur les risques, ça va porter leur attention, puis aussi à leur objectif. puis aussi proposer des solutions concrètes. Ça va aider d'influencer parce qu'on va avoir déjà réfléchi à des recommandations pour les hauts dirigeants. Donc, pour utiliser les données, pour tenter de les influencer, c'est présenter des tendances, les risques, des tableaux de bord ou des analyses. Souvent, juste mentionner des chiffres. Peut-être que ça va pas influencer les hauts dirigeants, mais si on le montre en format de tableau, un visuel, ça va pouvoir les influencer. Puis aussi, ça va aussi avec le compas, je ne sais pas si je dis le bon terme, là, avec l'utilisation des technologies, l'intelligence artificielle, les outils technologiques. Donc ça va contribuer à influencer les hauts dirigeants. Raconter des histoires, le storytelling, donner des exemples concrets. Si un contrôle n'a pas bien fonctionné, on peut expliquer, voici ce qui est arrivé parce que le contrôle, il n'était pas bien documenté, il y avait une déficience dans la façon qui était effectuée. Donc, si on dit un exemple concret, là, ça va pouvoir leur donner un exemple pour les influencer, là, si on propose aussi par la suite des solutions. Puis, relier les risques. S'il y a un risque qu'un contrôle est mal effectué, puis un risque que ça peut être identifié dans un outil, peut-être que ça va aussi influencer les hauts dirigeants. Donc, c'est à nous, les professionnels de la gestion financière, mais aussi à tous les employés d'identifier s'il y a des lacunes là, dans les contrôles internes pour pouvoir influencer là, les hauts dirigeants. Comme j'ai mentionné, proposer des solutions. Donc, c'est important de collaborer avec des collègues pour voir s'il y a des lacunes, comment on peut résoudre les lacunes, les contrôles ou améliorer les processus. En collaborant à l'intérieur des ministères, mais on peut aussi collaborer avec d'autres départements pour voir les meilleures pratiques là, qui sont en place dans les ministères et les organisations. Si on voit des bonnes pratiques qui sont effectuées, bien, ça va contribuer à influencer les décisions des hauts dirigeants. Donc, voici.
J'aime beaucoup l'idée de collaborer aussi pour s'entraider, pour rehausser le niveau de maturité. Donc, je pense que ça aussi, c'est quelque chose qu'on peut améliorer au sein de la collectivité parce que c'est certain que de nombreux d'entre vous ici aujourd'hui, vous avez tous des bonnes idées puis des bonnes pratiques. Peut-être qu'il y en a aussi qui sont plus agiles avec les technologies. Donc, comment on peut même automatiser certains des contrôles internes pour que ça devienne quasiment du just-in-time. Puis, on peut, dans le fond, axer sur peut-être des contrôles qui sont plus complexes ou de la détection proactive, surtout quand on pense peut-être même à la fraude. Donc, David, comment les contrôles internes sont-ils intégrés dans la stratégie générale en matière de gestion des risques de l'organisation, puis aussi votre gouvernance? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qu'on met à côté ou c'est quelque chose qu'on a mis au cœur un peu de la façon que votre gouvernance a géré à l'Agence de
C'est
revenus?
au cœur, c'est au cœur, ça c'est
Au
certain. Puis
cœur!
c'est des
Excellent!
décisions communes. J'ai quand même, c'est un sujet très large, évidemment, parce que les risques, c'est multiple, c'est très complexe. Puis pour nous, c'est géré par la direction de vérification interne qui le fait à partir du profil de risque de l'entreprise. Donc, la meilleure façon que je leur ai expliqué, c'est qu'on est des spécialistes de contrôle interne en rapport financier, en gestion financière. Et l'exercice s'inscrit dans un exercice collaboratif d'une genre de cartographie de la gestion des risques à l'échelle de l'agence, où chacun a sa spécialité. Donc, les TI sont impliqués, HR sont impliqués. Moi, je suis du côté financier, ou de façon régulière. Donc, les comités de vérification de chaque trimestriel vont mettre à jour ce plan-là et on fait un exercice de calibration avec eux. On s'assure que les risques sont bien intégrés. On s'assure aussi que les nouveaux risques sont identifiés, que c'est mis à jour. On discute des plans d'action. Donc, il faut vraiment le voir comme étant un exercice collaboratif qui permet de gérer les risques au niveau de l'organisation.
Excellent. Je suis d'accord. Merci. Donc, Ralph, est-ce que tu peux poursuivre, dans le fond, nous amener sur les dernières petites étapes qui te restent? Ensuite, on ramène nos panélistes.
Merci, Jocelyn. Okay, so our next section. let's talk maybe a bit about the history, real quick, and then we'll get into some of the evolution of internal controls, and then maybe some of the I guess emerging trends. So just to give people a little bit of history, I promise I won't go into the 20 plus year history, but just at a high level for those of you that aren't familiar. Uh, so it all of this kind of started way back in 2003. So historically, they focused, well, originally internal controls in the government of Canada focused on internal controls over financial reporting. And that was shaped by legislation and policy developments such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US. There was the Ontario budget measures and the Federal Accountability Act in Canada. So this started around 2002, which it was influenced by a lot of things that were going on and like globally or mostly in the States, and which led to the Federal Accountability Act in 2006. So these milestones kind of shaped the approach for internal controls. And a lot of these things had something in common. They emphasized the importance of accurate financial statements, accountability, transparency, things that we've talked about so far in this session. But departments were required to assess and report on the effectiveness of their controls around financial reporting. But our responsibility over time kind of grew, and the scope of internal controls started to transition from internal controls around financial reporting to internal controls around over financial management. And or what we call ICFM. So ICFM kind of goes beyond financial reporting. It includes controls around budgeting, forecasting, costing, investment planning, CFO attestation. There's a long list of things, and the shift from internal controls over financial reporting to internal controls around financial management kind of reflected the broader requirements that any organization, including government departments, had to kind of comply with or work with. So on the next slide, please. So uh, what is this kind of evolving scope? I touched on it a little bit, but under maybe we talk about this through a little quick example. So under internal controls over financial reporting, for example, departments focused on ensuring that their year-end financial statements are accurate. The shift to internal controls over financial management, that same department also now had to look at whether its budgeting and planning process includes appropriate controls like validating assumptions, reviewing forecasts, ensuring costing methodologies are sound. So in practice, this meant validating not just numbers but assumptions behind them. So, for example, the forecasts, the economic forecasts or program demand projections became important, right? So it wasn't just about reporting that number that that program is spending in a financial statement. It was what are the underlying things that led to that calculation of that number. Uh, Another example of this, let's say a team is implementing a new system, whether it's a G's and C's system or whatever kind of system. Now they needed to kind of ensure that automated controls within that system align with financial policies. And the IT general controls are in place to protect the data and the integrity of the data and the access to the system. So similarly, if they were rolling out kind of a budgeting tool, right? These IT general controls needed that are required to verify access control, who has access to the system, to in order to prevent unauthorized changes or anyone kind of going into the system and doing things they're not supposed to. So this evolution from ICFR to ICFM meant that internal controls were no longer just the responsibility of finance teams, and we touched on this a little bit, right? So they became a shared responsibility across the organization. So from a program manager to an IT specialist to a procurement officer. So I touched a little bit before about the five elements and the two, I guess, the management stone and from the top and human resources. Those shape the control environment. But in addition to this, there's two important things. One being the entity level controls. So these set the kind of organizational culture, like leadership promoting honest, clear HR policies. And then the IT general controls, these ensure systems like payroll and procurement and budgeting are secure, they're accurate, and they support financial management beyond just internal controls over financial reporting. So these entity level controls are kind of like for lack of a better word, kind of like the organizational compass. I don't want to overstep and call something else a compass, but not like the competency compass, but more of a moral compass of the organization. So without them, even if you had the strongest IT controls, these could fail, right? So the entity level controls, these are what set the tone and the integrity of the organization. So I know earlier I think in segment one, I talked about what does this mean to you if you're a finance procurement program person. But I think now, after we've talked a little bit about the policies and a little bit more of the theory and the shift, I thought it would be kind of cool to kind of come back and say, now that we've talked about all of these things, what does this really mean if you're a finance person, right? This means that there's a stronger integration of controls across all functions. So budgeting, planning, forecasting, meaning fewer surprises, right? And better data for decision making. If you're a program person, this means embedding these controls uh, in the funding process. They lead to faster approvals, reduced risks, right? Of making the wrong decisions without with having inaccurate data, right? If you're a procurement person, this means automated controls and systems like system safeguards to help ensure compliance. And then for people in internal audit, I know I touched about this a little bit, but this means shifting the way you do work. So you're not focusing on, transactional type testing, right? It's more strategic, right? So uh, this is kind of what's in it for everybody, and I think the message we all wanted to kind of we were hoping to come across today, that internal controls are no longer just about preventing errors, they're about enabling the organization. So as we evolve, every employee and everybody has a role, and you become kind of a steward of integrity, of risk. You're more risk aware, and then it enables the organization to kind of have a better sense and foresight of these risks, right? And these risks, that are emerging in this current environment, right, with technological advancements. So this is kind of, I think, the message that we were all trying to convey today. But before we move to one last panel discussion, we have a couple of more true and false questions. I don't think these ones are skill testing ones, but we'll see. We'll see.
We're looking at
So question,
automation and
yeah,
AI
see.
to reduce the need for
Mm.
an internal control. We're keeping you busy, at least interact with us a little bit.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think for me, Ralph, like internal controls are a way even you could elevate risk in your organization. You can take more bold decision if you put, for example, an additional compensatory control. Right, you could put an additional oversight somewhere to make sure that if the risk materialize, you can either roll back. You know how to de-risk a little bit. So I think there's actually quite a bit we could do better for Canadians if we use internal controls strategically, and if we put the controls in the right area to serve us well, they can serve as nice safeguards. And especially if you're looking to experiment a little bit, innovate a little bit, it's unknown for your organization, you don't have strong track records, but those can be done, I think, quite in a safe way, without exposing, like Isabelle mentioned about some of the risks. We could expose ourselves to media or public scrutiny, but I think they don't necessarily need to be looked at as, a policing function. So
That's
on
right.
the next question too, we have about the new risk and compliance process. Says it replaces the management accountability framework as the primary tool for assessing internal controls and departments. So a lot of you probably, if you've been in government for quite some time, know of the MAF, and the MAF is now the new risk and compliance process. And so we're asking true or false if you've been
Maybe it's an
listening.
unfair. Yeah, well, I don't. I was gonna say maybe a little bit an unfair question because I don't think I gave a. I mean, I talked about it, but you're right. For those of you that got it, it is replacing the management accountability framework, and I think David touched on it earlier. I know I only talked about the internal controls part of RCP, but it covers about 11 other areas of focus, right? From people management, procurement, real property, G's and C's. So not just internal controls. Um, and then it's shifting more of assessing maturity in all of those areas. So it has already replaced MAF. I think it launched this summer, and departments are completing their self-assessments as we speak. They're due, I think, next week to TBS. So it did replace MAF. So, but for those of you that didn't get it right, no problem. I didn't really give you a date, so I think it was an unfair question, but that's okay. Now we all know.
They all know. Yeah, and it's a way for the Treasury Board to shift a little bit to mature, because the math was done quite a long time ago. So, and it is self-assessment. So a risk in one department is not the same in another, right? So you may want to emphasize in one area more than another, depending on the nature of your operation and the mandate of your department. So those are kind of why some of the shifts were made. So a bit of panelists, I need to put them to work. Isabelle, can you describe when we have to shift from ICFR to ICFM, what that meant for your team? If you had any challenges with that?
ICFR was focused on financial reporting. So it was increased work for my teams, but also for business process owners. As Ralph mentioned, ICFM is focused on financial management, reviewing if the process are efficient, if there are specific risks that needs to be looked at. For example, procurement process, if there are any procurement individuals in the today. One of the control that we reviewed this year is the procurement management framework. So that was not looked at as a part of ICFR, but now ICFM, we reviewed that control to ensure that the framework was revised and approved as well. Another example is user access reviews for IT, if there are any IT folks today. So user access is also, there's more scrutiny from the Auditor General relating to user access, and we do use more systems. So system controls like user access is important. So we've reviewed that control as well. And also for payroll, as part of ICFM, it's not only that there are the proper approvals, but for payroll, for example, we ensure that the approvals are timely. So some challenges that my team faced also is to the documentation. We had to review some processes to ensure that it's not only the financial reporting controls, but also some financial management. And also all new processes were documented like CFO attestation process. So it took work from the internal control teams, but also the process owner that are doing those process and are the expert in those fields. And all that is to strengthen the overall internal control over financial management for the department. And then also one part of ICFM that is important is also to ensure that the process is consistent and it's efficient, and also that there's less duplication in our processes.
That makes sense. So through ICFM, we have a bit of a license to go probe and make sure that the things are doing well and effectively, which I think is really important, right? Because if not, programs would just be delivering and the deputy heads would have all the accountabilities and kind of no one is having a bit of that preventative measure. So very important and a bigger scope as well when we're looking at the ICFM. David, when we speak of ICFM, we introduce the concept of entity level control, so sitting at the whole of the organization, and ITGC's internal controls on IT. So how important are those when you look at ICFM?
Very important. So I'm not sure if it's a perfect analogy, but let's think of control like a house, like a house. So entity level control, ELC, are the foundation of the roof. They set the tone at the top, governance, oversight, value and ethics, code of conduct, training, communication. They create an environment where control can live, can breathe. A strong ELC ensure control are performed consistently and not weakened by management, external pressure, lack of training, value and ethics, and expected behavior. In other words, they somehow manage the inherent risk of human-driven control and provide an umbrella under which all control can work efficiently. Now let's talk about ITGC, keep the house analogy. So it's like the plumbing and the electricity of that house. So you may not see them in every room, but nothing works without them, from the toaster to the toilet. So they safeguard the integrity and reliability of the system by control like system access provisioning, change management, and computer operation. Weak ITGC can undermine IT-dependent control, even if the design is sound for ICFM and ICFR. Yeah. So this includes automated control like three-way match. It also includes manual control that rely on IT, like electronic signature. So you can have the smartest automated control in the world, but it's useless if a system administrator can disable it or change it whenever it's inconvenient. So let me provide you with a light-hearted example to make it very visual. So let's go back to my house and toilet analogy. It's not perfect, but please bear with me. It's Friday, and internal control is a very fun topic. I will show you. So think of the body natural process as a control. So it requires us to use the toilet on a regular basis. So that control depends on the tool, the toilet, which in turn depends on the house plumbing, water flow, the ITGC, to work. If the plumbing fails, the toilet itself still exists, but the control can be performed as intended. So this is an ITGC issue. The infrastructure is not reliable. So now imagine that my child broke an exposed water pipe while playing. So my control must still happen, and I cannot delay it by much. Sadly, the system, the water is no longer supports it. So in theory, I could perform the control on the floor, which would be unacceptable. Why? Why? This is where ELC step in. Thanks to the value instilled by my family, training, communication, value and ethic, reinforced by the tone of the top from my wife, governance. I know I must find an alternative solution that keep the environment clean within acceptable standard until the plumbing is fixed. So I'm not sure if that fun example to give you an example of ITGC and ELC how they interact. ELC and ITGC together create an environment that allow all control to operate in an effective and dependable manner. They reduce the risk of error, inconsistency, and failure, whether it's caused by the human or system, which make it an essential solution for ICFR and ICFM.
Very interesting. I love how our whole segment has been about paint and toilets and houses and roofs. I think we're looking at internal control as a bit of that architecture that supports a lot of the departments and how to keep it safe and functioning. I want to touch on one question. We also have some questions from the chat. So, but Isabel and David together, let me know, what are your thoughts about how technology can play to strengthen or weaken internal controls? I think that's really important as we look at, AI, but as well as we look at how we can become more vulnerable for example, hacking.
I can start. And technology can help us be more efficient. For example, RPA, robotic automation, process automation, are being implemented in some departments. So there are efficiencies, but then we have to ensure, like David mentioned, that we have the proper ITGC in place to ensure that we can rely on those efficiencies for robotic process automation. And also AI, it's the same thing. We need to ensure that we have the controls in place to ensure that we can rely on the output of AI. So that's the weak side. We need to ensure that we have sufficient and the proper controls in place.
I agree. I often see in audit reports, one of the key weakness that comes back on ITGCs is that we don't remove accesses for employees when they change roles. So that means that maybe you're letting people with permissions be able to come back and change, administrative rights. So those, if we want to maximize the use of the technology, you may have to strengthen who has access when, because you may be kind of like, heating your house, but all your windows are open in the background without those key. And that is one that comes back often in audit reports. I'm inviting you to go check your departmental audit reports and go see that ITGC control is coming back as a weakness for your organization. David, some thoughts from you on how technology can improve or worsen?
I agree with what Isabelle said. To me, I see it as an amplifier, both with the good and the bad. So if it's well managed, it leads to efficiency, stronger control. But there's risk coming with that. So every time you use technology, there's also risk. And this is where internal control play a risk, because we're here to mitigate that risk and to just keep the good portion of the technology. So I think it's key. I think it's also a key message to understand that, as internal control, we are often seen as, like limiting innovation, but we need to change that view, because control is not here to limit innovation. In fact, it's here to support it, to secure it, to make sure that, the risks are mitigated, to make it a success. So like tomorrow, think about it. We were talking about AI, we're talking about, automation, RPA, all of that. We're trying to implement that. So our CFO, like deputy minister, commissioner, like they will need to demonstrate that that technology is being used in our process and control, that is well mastered, that there's proper oversight, and we have a role to play with that, and it's internal control. So we'll need to control those new technology to give that confidence to the public. So I think it's very important. We do have an important role to support the transformation of those innovation that will come in the future years. So it's a very interesting topic, and this is why, in the pool, I remember seeing that some people say, oh yeah, I do you see more control, less control with technology? People will say, no, I do see the value of control. I believe it will be even more important, because we will need to demonstrate the strategy. So yeah, very interesting topic.
I completely agree with you. And if you want to accelerate with the technology, then having a few safety belts here and there to give it the assurance and a bit that echo of what's going on the ground. Did we open all our windows and our back doors are open, or are we kind of still keeping it safe, right? So I think we could do it in a very responsible and accountable way as well. And if you look at some of the code of conduct related to robotics process automation and artificial intelligence, you will see that, right? The judgment and the transparency and responsibility are key to making sure that we do it in a safe way, especially as stewards, right, of taxpayers' money. We have an interesting question in the chat. It kind of touches on what Isabelle and you, David, have mentioned, and I think we're going to leave it to there. But what is the biggest cultural barrier? Like we talked to these participants today about the importance of internal control, but I think for me, it's a lot about making it relevant for our senior leaders, right? They kind of see it as an administrative or maybe like a back office something. So how can you make it relevant? What are those barriers to governance so that we can kind of get the senior leaders to understand the importance of it and maybe play with us a little bit more? What are your thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, I see two barriers. So I agree with you, Jocelyn. So having impactful communication is important. Sometimes it's about positioning what we do because people see control as, mostly compliance, but we need to change that. Like there's value into control. There's a reason why the control is there. So being able to position the topic with senior leader, make them understand because they care. Sometimes it's just a matter of how we present it to them. So that is like the first part, making sure that communication, and we do have a role to play into that. Like we do need to adapt to make it clear what it means. And the other thing I would say, something about like resisting change, because I feel that to make internal control stronger, we need to evolve them. And we are often tempted to keep the old ways. And in a time where there's AI, automation, and everything, we will need to go out of that comfort zone and recreate a new comfort zone with internal control. So that shift is not an easy one to do. Like we're often tempted to say, okay, so now there's that new thing, and then as soon as there's like some risk, some problem, we go back to the old ways because we're never punished like to keep the old ways. But I think we have expectation from the citizen that government needs to mature, and we need to take that step to go to the maturation of how we deliver control, which needs to come with new set of control to demonstrate that those new control are as strong or even stronger.
I agree with that. Isabelle, and any thoughts you want to add on this last question?
I think David mentioned the most of it, and I think it's all to remove barriers. It's to have those discussion on internal control and having open discussion with team and collaborations, asking questions wherever you are in the organization. Oh, I've seen this checklist. Do we need to have it approved? Does it need to be saved in a certain repository, either GC Docs or SAP? So having the reflexes to ask questions and having those discussions with the teams.
I agree, the curiosity part, and to David's point, the storytelling part. I think it's all about the SOA because we're the masters of these, right? If you've, been in internal audit or in finance, like you're taught this as at university, but that's our kind of our area of expertise. And if you think of senior managers, they most likely don't. So it's a lot about that education piece and the so what for them, right? Why does this matter for them, and how does that serve them in their program delivery? Donc, un grand merci. So we're at the end of our segment. Donc, on est à la fin de notre discussion. J'aimerais remercier honnêtement Ralph, Isabelle et David. Vous avez fait un super bon travail. Vous m'avez bien accompagné aussi. J'ai beaucoup apprécié vos idées, vos exemples tangibles aussi. Je pense qu'on a pivoté un petit peu pour essayer de rendre ça tangible et utiliser des exemples qui nous touchent un peu dans la vie personnelle. Et un grand merci aussi à vous, les participants. Donc, à travers le Canada, on avait une belle participation aujourd'hui. Merci énormément d'avoir été ici, d'avoir été curieux aussi. On espère vous laisser un petit peu avec la réflexion pour pouvoir grandir, pour pouvoir peut-être rehausser le rôle des contrôles internes au sein de votre ministère, ou si vous êtes curieux, peut-être même toucher un rôle dans les contrôles internes éventuellement. Et j'en profite aussi pour dire un grand merci à mon équipe, parce que c'est mon équipe qui a organisé le segment avec l'École de la fonction publique. Et donc, c'est beaucoup de travail pour eux aussi, et je leur dis un sincère merci. Parce que sinon, ça ne serait pas possible sans eux. Donc, on vous invite à reviser la section des ressources. Vous y trouverez les liens utiles, dont la présentation qu'on a fait aujourd'hui. Il y a des liens à GC Infobase, aussi des liens au modèle d'estimation et aussi un peu des liens vers les conseils sur des conseils sur les mémoires au cabinet ou même les soumissions au Conseil du Trésor. Donc, vous allez y trouver toutes sortes de belles ressources pour vous, les spécialistes. Donc, je pense que c'est une bonne façon. J'aimerais aussi souligner, aujourd'hui, on a réussi à comprendre les contrôles internes, je pense. Si on refait un peu le sondage du début, on espère avoir élevé un peu votre compréhension de base sur l'importance des contrôles internes, leur rôle au sein de l'organisme, mais un peu leur rôle même sur protéger l'intégrité de la fonction publique, l'intégrité pour les Canadiens, la transparence qu'on a parlé tantôt. Et aussi vraiment soutenir une saine gestion financière qui est essentielle. C'est comme ça aussi qu'on vient chercher la confiance des parlementaires et aussi de nos Canadiens. Ça permet aux candidats un peu de soutenir la responsabilisation et l'atténuation des risques qu'on a parlé. On peut peut-être prendre des meilleurs risques si on a un meilleur système de contrôle interne qui est plus mature, peut-être une meilleure collaboration, une bonne gouvernance, comme on en a parlé tantôt aussi. Donc, restez à l'écoute. On vous a parlé un peu de cette série des principes fondamentaux de la gestion financière. Donc, c'est une façon pour le Bureau du contrôleur général d'essayer de relever les connaissances fondamentales de nos collectivités. On a une prochaine session qui s'en vient au mois de décembre, donc le 11 décembre. On va essayer de voir si on est capable d'avoir une audience encore plus large que celle d'aujourd'hui. Et cette session-là va focaliser sur les comptes publics. Les comptes publics seront possiblement déposés en chambre prochainement. Donc, le thème sera juste à point et on pourra discuter avec les experts des comptes publics parce que c'est aussi un exercice très important. Il touche le cœur de l'information financière de votre ministère, du rendement et de la transparence encore aux Canadiens. Je vous invite à vous inscrire. On va partager aussi cette date-là et le lien d'inscription avec votre gestion pour s'assurer que ceci vous rejoint. Un petit rappel aussi, s'il vous plaît, peut-être partagez vos commentaires avec nous. On espère que la session a été pertinente pour vous, mais on vous invite à remplir le formulaire des commentaires pour essayer de nous aider à améliorer, puis aussi à voir est-ce qu'on a réussi à rendre ou à élever votre curiosité et à rendre la session pertinente pour vous aujourd'hui. Donc, je vous invite à le remplir, prendre quelques minutes, ça nous ferait plaisir et ça sera pertinent pour nos équipes aussi. Donc, encore un sincère merci. J'espère que ça a été une session intéressante. Je pense qu'on a été agile, on a été un petit peu pas tant scripté. J'ai dit à Ralph avant de commencer la session, j'ai dit on est comme le reality TV des contrôles internes. Donc, on devrait peut-être avoir comme notre propre channel de YouTube. Et la prochaine événement, on se réunit encore ensemble le 11 décembre. Un sincère merci à vous. Puis aussi, je vous souhaite une belle fin de semaine, puis aussi une belle journée de la vérité et de la réconciliation qui s'annonce le 30 septembre prochain. Merci encore à vous tous. Passez une belle fin de journée.